Chapter 10 Dark Thoughts. It was a dark and smelly night. Dark because Indiana Energy had not yet hooked up electric service at the old Glazer place. Brock called them and set up an appointment for the next day, but we were going to be spending that first night without power. And smelly because the combination of different stinks in that place was just incredible. First, there was the overwhelmingly tart odor of cat urine. I don't know if Mrs. Glazer actually had litter boxes for her collection of felines, and the cats just preferred to do their business outside of them, or what. I hadn't seen any litter boxes yet on my brief excursions into the jungle of the rest of the house, but I had spotted plenty of stains and piles of desiccated cat turds. I wouldn't have been surprised to find out that the cats had just been doing their thing naturally, wherever they could find a good spot. Beneath the urine, I could detect a strong bouquet of rotten milk, with hints of rancid meat. Brock and I were camped out in a first-floor annex that we had emptied of trash by literally shoveling it out into the hallway and forcing the door closed. We weren't located anywhere near the kitchen, but the spoiled food smells somehow persisted. If I inhaled deeply and let the odor roll around in my mouth a bit, which made me a bit gaggy, I could pick up a nose of damp decay, a sour smell. I didn't even like to think about what that meant. We had so much work ahead of us. Once we got rid of all the junk in this place, which was a massive undertaking in itself, we were probably going to have to tear out and replace plaster in many areas to put a stop to mold that had taken root behind the walls. There were more smells too, hints of sulfur, cigarette ash, hot stewed garbage. The lack of electricity for air conditioning in the house just threw those smells into sharp relief. It was quiet, though. It isn't until you stay in a house with no utilities that you notice the real lack of sound in rooms that you would normally perceive as completely silent. There were no low-humming fans, no dripping faucets, no softly buzzing appliances, no high-pitched electric whines of cathode ray tubes. Outside, crickets called to their lovers, with a symphony of chirps by rubbing rough upper wings against rigid lower wings, like a child might twang a plastic comb. Occasionally I'd hear a small animal scuttering around, upstairs or inside the walls somewhere. Mice? A squirrel? Great. I looked at the glowing face of my wristwatch. 11:37 p.m. I was finding it impossible to sleep. Brock and I had gone to bed around 8, once the last rays of the sun vanished and it became too dark to move around the house safely. With no electricity, there isn't much to do besides sleep when the light is gone. I felt a kinship with my ancient ancestors, a tie to the land and the sky that I hadn't felt in many years, maybe ever. My schedule was now dictated by a gaseous ball of flame millions of miles away, rather than the comforting override of human ingenuity, of incandescent bulbs and red LEDs and computer screens. Had I even slept since I lay down hours ago? I wasn't sure exactly, but now I felt wide awake. The house shifted and creaked. I recalled the voice that we heard in the farmhouse earlier that day and then wished I hadn't. My heart was ice again with adrenaline, radiating outward through my chest. I strained my ears for any sound, any whisper of a voice. What if I heard something? What if it told us to get out? It was pitch black. I'm not sure I could even find my way to the door. I'd probably trip over Brock and break my neck. Or break his neck. I felt around in the dark gingerly. If my fingers knocked away the disposable lighter I was looking for, I'd never find it again in this blackness. Eventually my hand closed around the plastic case and I flicked the igniter. A lighter might not seem like a lot of illumination, but in complete blackness, it does a pretty good job. The small flame flickered and danced. Shadows wobbled like wraiths. I lit the wick of a glass jar candle that we found among Mrs. Glazer's things and sat back against the wall. The annex wasn't large, maybe 10 by 14 feet. It must have been an addition, constructed decades after the main building, as it was made of drywall rather than plaster and had a lower ceiling than the rest of the house. A door in the far wall, bolted and chained, led outside, while another led deeper into the house. I'd stuffed some balled-up shirts and newspapers under the ladder, fruitlessly trying to hold back the stench. Brock was sleeping in front of the interior door on an old mattress we found. It was disgusting and stained, so we threw a new plastic tarp over it, and Brock rolled out his sleeping bag on top of that. I was on the other side of the room on an air mattress that I had inflated with a manual pump. Earlier this evening, after doing as much cleaning as we could, Brock had driven me by my parents' house to pick up a few things. My mom and dad, God bless them, offered to help me move out and transport all my belongings to the new house. I think they were beyond ready for me to get out of their home and get my life back on track. They probably threw a party and invited all the neighbors when I told them that I'd finally found a place to live. But I had to decline, forcefully, because I didn't want them to see the place that I was moving into and then have to deal with them freaking out over it. Sometimes you just can't tell them the whole truth about things. So we threw a few of the most essential items, clothes, air mattress, and toiletries, into the back of Brock's pickup and promised to come back for the rest later. We also made a quick stop at a gas station convenience store to pick up a lighter, a snow shovel for rearranging the garbage, and a couple of sandwiches before returning to our new home with only an hour or so of daylight remaining. The house creaked again, slowly. I imagined that someone was moving around upstairs. It seemed plausible at the time. Okay, this is ridiculous, I thought. There is no way I'm going to get back to sleep tonight. I weighed the pros of waking up Brock just to have someone to talk to, against the possibility of him becoming totally enraged. I could just see his copper-colored forehead and curly-top fade sticking out the end of his sleeping bag. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention earlier that Brock is black, didn't I? You probably already formed an image in your mind and assumed he was a white guy. Am I right? Just because he skipped a grade and drives a pickup? Racist. Just kidding. He's really only half black on his dad's side. Mr. DeKalb owns a chain of gas stations in town, and his wife is kind of a hippie artist. They left for some sort of international volunteer assignment with the Peace Corps a few months ago, and weren't supposed to be back for 3 years. Anyway, Brock really stands out around here because there aren't a lot of other minorities. Waking him up won the battle in my mind. "Brock," I hissed. He didn't move. I tossed a sock that landed perfectly across his face and was met with a groan. He rolled over in his sleeping bag. "What do you want?" "Wake up!" Did you get scared or something?" Damn it, I thought. Maybe a little. "No," I replied, "I just can't sleep." Brock groaned again and sat up, wincing against the candle. "What time is it?" "Almost midnight." Brock stared at the wall for a minute or so before finally speaking. "So, what's up?" This isn't going to work. I hated to be negative, but I just couldn't imagine any possible future in which this turned out well for us. Either we were going to burn ourselves out working too hard, or wreck the place trying to make repairs that we weren't qualified to do, or we were never going to finish and the owner would be furious with us. "What do you mean?" "How are the two of us, by ourselves, going to get this place ready for someone to live in?" I stared down at a black, oily stain on the hardwood. Brock rubbed his eye with the back of a hand. "I told you going in this was going to take some doing." "I don't want to kill the plan, but I'm being real with you. I just don't think we can do it. We don't know anything about construction or restoration or... Look, it's not going to be like the Karate Kid. We aren't going to have a 5-minute montage set to some pop song where we learn everything we need to know, and by the end of it, we're experts and everything is easy." I heard the patter of small animal feet coming from upstairs. "There's just so much to do. It's a lot worse than I thought it was going to be." Brock nodded. "And we have all the time we need. We work on it every day. We do what we can do, and we figure out the rest." Mr. Armisen should have probably just accidentally burned it down and collected the insurance money. But then where would we be, man? How am I even going to take a shower in the morning? "We're going to improvise. We're smart. We went to college, right? We should be able to figure something out." "I can't get to sleep in this place." Brock turned to face me, wide awake now. I could tell that he was getting disgusted. Okay, here's the plan, he said. Tomorrow, we'll explore the rest of the house. You pick whichever room you want, and we'll clean that one out first. It'll be your bedroom. They'll hook up electricity, we'll have lights, computer, whatever. In 3 or 4 days, we'll have running water. I looked back at Brock, unconvinced. You're freaking out. It's fine. We'll get through it, he said. And what if we don't? I asked. Brock raised his eyebrows. Well, I guess you can always go back to media pimps, crawling on your hands and knees, and live in your parents' house. God, we have to make this work, I said. The thought almost made me shudder. Brock laughed quietly. At least no one's told us to get out yet. I looked around. Flickery illumination from the candle made everything look like an old silent film, and Brock's shadow seemed to be an enormous phantom crouching over him, ready to pounce. Through the room's only window, I watched a waxing gibbous moon emerging from the spotty cloud cover. One of the glass panes was shattered, probably broken with a rock thrown by some kid. I suddenly felt ashamed, remembering my own vandalism and its consequences. I shouldn't have written on the wall of that house, I said slowly. I wouldn't worry about it, man. But that was the first time I've ever experienced anything like that. Is that good or bad? I shrugged. I think maybe there is something to the whole afterlife thing. Brock looked amused. Seriously, I said, stop laughing. Zane, come on. I mean, I just don't see any other explanation for it. And you think when you die, you just hang out in your broken down old house for all eternity. Maybe. Maybe that's all they got. It's better than total nothingness or whatever. At least you're not just gone. Brock nodded noncommittally. I toyed with the lighter, turning it over and over in my hands. There were 100 threads of thought running through my mind, and none of them seemed to add up to a consistent, logical worldview. I tried to picture being some kind of a spirit tied to a building forever. I think old Mrs. Glazer would be really happy if we fixed her place up, I said. Yep, it still sounds crazy, I thought, especially when I say it out loud. Yes, said Brock. Amen. Let's do it. And if you can't do it for your pal Brock, do it for the spirit of a creepy dead lady who couldn't throw anything away. I shushed Brock. What, you think she's going to hear? Let's just not take any chances. Whatever, said Brock. After a moment he added, I really can't do this by myself, though. I thought I could count on you. I groaned. I'll give it a week. See how it goes, I guess. I lay back on my air mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling. There's some kind of an animal running around upstairs. Rats, mice, probably. We'll get traps. Brock and I were silent for a while. I wasn't even sure he was still awake until he said, if we figure out how to do this stuff, we could flip houses on our own. Mm-hmm. We could go into business for ourselves. That'd be nice, I said. Not have to work for anybody. The warmth and low light were getting me a little drowsy. About time. If we find anything we want in here, we can keep it, Brock said. What if Mrs. Glazer left a hidden fortune? Is it ours? I'll let you take that up with her ghost, man, since you're the expert now. I sat up suddenly. What if we see her? I'm not too worried about that. Do you even know what room she died in? Brock shook his head. Nope, Mr. Armisen wouldn't tell me. I got the impression that he's a little bit superstitious, afraid of ghosts. The candle suddenly sputtered and went out. Brock knows me too well. He predicted, accurately, that I would immediately panic and imagine some sort of creature swooping in for the kill as soon as the room went black and called out, "Relax! It's fine! Light it!" I yelled, "Light it!" Then I remembered that I was the one holding the lighter. Flicking the spark wheel brought the blessed flame back into the room. I touched it to the candle's wick and stared at Brock, eyes wide. Total coincidence, he said. Candles go out sometimes. There was a time I would have believed that. There was a time I would have said that myself. Is she here? I whispered, as I looked around the nearly empty room for a hint of a misty vapor or an unexplained shadow. There was nothing. Now you're creeping me out. Is she trying to tell us something? Was this the room she died in? Brock shook his head like he thought I'd totally lost it. Mrs. Glazer? I called hesitantly. Are you here? There was no response. Zane, it's late. You need to sleep, man. There's no way. Well, I have to go to sleep. Leave the candle lit if you want. Commune with Mrs. Glazer or whatever. But do it quietly. I have to wake up for the power company people in a few hours. I stayed up for quite a long time after Brock drifted off again into unconsciousness, my eyes darting around the room, scanning for something, anything, but nothing else made his presence known to me physically. Spiritually, perhaps, that was a different matter. It did seem like someone was in the room with us, watching us, but it didn't feel like a malevolent presence. Maybe the tepid, orange, womb-like room was wearing down my defenses as I became sleepier, or maybe my initial fear was dissipating as the house and its sounds grew familiar. I don't know. Eventually, I decided that it was Mrs. Glazer and that she wanted us there. It was right and good. She would protect us if we took care of her house and her belongings, and if we remembered her somehow. I resolved, that night, there in the dim light of a flickering candle flame, with Brock snoring away, to honor her memory. Mrs. Glazer and I had an understanding. I still hid, though, pulling the comforter way up over my head when I lay back down to sleep. I awoke after an uneasy night to find the morning sun streaming into our little space. Brock was still asleep across the room, laying half on his mattress and half on the floor. There was a warm, pleasant weight resting on my back, which fell off and squeaked when I rolled over to investigate. It was a skinny orange cat. It stared at me expectantly and squeaked again. Well, hello, cat, I said. The cat, in response, sauntered over and headbutted me gently. It wasn't wearing a collar. Its fur was somewhat dirty and rumpled, and I noticed, when it turned around, that it was a non-neutered male. Where did you come from? He didn't respond because cats don't speak English. Brock heard me and sat up with a start, though. Are the Indiana Energy people here? No, I replied, but there's a cat. Well, that's strange, man. The cat flounced over to Brock and rubbed itself against his leg. Yeah, how did he get in here? I pointed to the window and both doors, which were all tightly closed. Brock looked around for a moment, then lifted an ornate, brass air return register in the floor. It wasn't screwed down and moved easily. He dropped it back into place with a reverberating clang. Been in the ducts, probably. Was that you I heard in the walls? I asked the cat. The cat padded over and flopped down beside me. You're a friendly little guy. I petted his scruffy head and looked around for the remains of last night's gas station dinner, a prepackaged turkey sandwich, thinking I'd give the cat a bit of leftover meat, only to find that he had already eaten it. You think that's one of the cats that gnawed on Mrs. Glazer? Brock asked. Oh God, I said, don't tell me that. Brock was probably right, though. This cat was too friendly to be a stray, and it knew its way around the place well. I dug into my pocket for a piece of gas station beef jerky that I had been saving for breakfast, unwrapped it, and offered it to the cat. He devoured it. You know, by feeding a stray cat, you're basically adopting it, Brock said. That cat is never going to leave you alone now. As if to agree with him, the cat crawled into my lap and curled up, purring. I picked some dirt out of its fur. There was a sudden pounding from the front door. That must be the electric people. Brock wandered off to take care of business. You want to be my cat? I asked. The cat yawned so widely I thought its jaw would crack, and closed its eyes. What should your name be? The power was on at last. True to his word, Brock let me pick the room I wanted, and we cleaned that one out first. The house, aside from the protruding addition that we slept in the first night, was basically a simple cube with a square layout and shallow-hipped roof. Each floor was divided into 4 major rooms, with smaller closets and bathrooms appended to those. I learned later that this style was called American Foursquare, for obvious reasons. The outside was unassuming wood, painted white, and relatively unadorned. It was simple, efficient. I explored the dank basement, full of moldering cardboard boxes, disgusting baby food jars filled with waste, and mysterious creeping pipes. It was no place for a bedroom. Upstairs, we had to turn sideways to squeeze into narrow paths through the trash, being extra careful not to topple the stacks of broken appliances, magazines, and unidentifiable junk. Plastic and glass crunched beneath our feet. The 2 main floors weren't much more promising than the basement. They were uniformly dirty, filled with the collected detritus of Mrs. Glazer's life. The rooms themselves were also pretty boring, with plain, perpendicular walls, square corners, and no architectural detail. If I got the first pick, I wanted to make it count, and I wanted to get something special. As I was about to despair, we found the staircase to the attic. The door at the top was locked, and Mr. Armisen hadn't given us a key. "What the hell," Brock said. "It isn't like the rest of the house isn't already wrecked." Then he kicked the door open like an action hero. The frame splintered around the latch bolt, and we were in. It was perfect. A large open space beneath the peak of the roof, with dormered windows looking out over the landscape on all 4 sides. It was still cluttered with stuff like the rest of the house, but this wasn't just unusable junk. It was antique furniture and household items. Everything was buried under dust and sticky cobwebs, but with a little work, I was sure they could be salvaged. It looked like Mrs. Glazer never got up here and didn't have a chance to store any of her crap. Spooky, as I had dubbed the cat, followed us into the attic and made himself at home, stalking dust bunnies and exploring every nook, probably hoping for a tasty mouse. Eventually he meeped at me, so I held him up to the west window where we could both admire the view. A long plain of tall, swaying grasses sloped gently away into the distance until it met a deciduous grove about half a mile away. We were so high up on the 3rd floor that I could look down onto the tops of the trees. It felt like we were flying. Spooky seemed mesmerized. The house was sited on the outskirts of Broadacre, in the middle of a 30-acre plot that had thus far escaped redevelopment. Through the north window, we could see far off to the Salamone River that divided the North Broadacre development from our town. The eastern view was mostly blocked by an immense maple tree. To the south, we could see the front yard and driveway extending all the way to the edge of Broadacre's commercial district that bordered the property. Tiny people were going about their business like medieval paupers, farming on the grounds of our grand castle. I turned to Brock. "This is it." "Okay," he said. "Let's get started." Much of our time over the next several days was spent clearing junk. We'd start on a pile, sort it into smaller piles of things to keep and things to trash. The majority of it went into the latter pile. Brock and I cleaned out a space in the attic that I could call my bedroom, and I helped haul junk from his selected room on the 2nd floor. Bags of garbage began to pile up outside the house, though it seemed that we were hardly making a dent in the mess. Around the 4th day of our tenancy, I heard Brock stomping up the attic stairs to where I was wiping down an antique oak chest of drawers with furniture polish. He was carrying a large package, wrapped in brown paper. "We got a special delivery," he said, setting the box on a moldy plush armchair. "Who's it from?" He took out a pocket knife and sliced through the tape. "There's no return address." Brock opened the box and pulled out a bottle of bleach. "Cleaning supplies?" I looked inside the box. It was full of drain opener, cleaning cloths, disinfectants, bathroom tile and grout cleaner, and more. Everything was packed neatly in styrofoam peanuts. At the bottom was a layer of toiletries. I grabbed a stick of much-needed deodorant. Brock turned the brown wrapping over in his hands. There was no indication of who the gift was from. "There's no postage on it," I said. "Somebody dropped it off at the house." "Probably your parents." They don't know where we are. Maybe Mr. Armisen? Could be. But it wasn't. Over the next few days, we asked everyone we knew, which wasn't many people, granted, and no one would own up to the mysterious package. Then another one showed up. This one was full of scented candles, matches, and a butane lighter. I have a pretty good guess who's sending these, Brock said. Who? I lit a candle called Summer Strawberries. It didn't smell anything like strawberries, or summer, but the sweet scent did improve the room perceptibly. That Wisteria girl. I huffed. How would she know where we are? My parents don't even know where we are. She said she had her ways of finding people. Like a stalker. I'm going to see, mused Brock, if I can catch her leaving a package. Brock loved engineering and figuring things out, so I wasn't surprised to see him get into the idea of trying to solve this puzzle. Like me, he had worked for a couple of different local companies, engineering firms in his case, before coming to the realization that he wasn't cut out for the 9-to-5 world and retiring at the ripe old age of 23. I think that panic attacks were interfering with his punctuality. The episodes embarrassed him, and he felt like he couldn't talk to anyone about them, so bosses just thought he was lazy when he showed up late or left early because the stress was too much for him. He'd feel dizzy, his heart would race, his hands would tingle, and it was just impossible to concentrate during those anxious times. I should know. I feel similarly when I have to network or socialize with a crowd of unfamiliar people. Worst of all, being black, Brock didn't catch any breaks or sympathy from his mostly white coworkers either. Deep-seated racism dies hard, and though no one said it out loud, you can guess what they were all thinking. Since the incident with the tornado, I hadn't noticed Brock experiencing any other panic attacks. We were both working harder than ever, but there was little stress. We didn't have any bosses looking over our shoulders. We were the masters of our own destinies. Maybe he was getting better. Packages had been showing up every 3 or 4 days, so he had some time. Both boxes were left on the front porch atop a large concrete planter. We also knew that the deliveries had been made after 11 p.m., because that's the time we took the last of the trash bags outside and turned in for the night, and before 9 a.m., because that's when Brock went out to find the gifts from our anonymous benefactor waiting. Next day, I came downstairs with a load of trash to find Brock on a ladder, setting up an elaborate warning system with string. Since the house was inundated with odds and ends, we had access to almost anything we wanted for free, but finding particular items for specific uses was usually problematic. Brock told me that he had lucked into a box full of clothesline and pulleys in the basement. As far as I could tell, he had strung a line across the top step of the front porch that traveled up a faux Grecian column, across the porch roof, and into his bedroom window. I'll set something up inside to alert me, Brock explained, once there's a pull on the rope. Isn't she going to see the rope? I think I'm going to tie on some fishing line to the end and run that across the stairs instead, once I dig up some fishing line. I headed back into the house. I'll get you some. I've seen it somewhere. With the addition of the fishing line and a couple of other items that Brock cobbled together, he had a complete alarm system. A tug on the rope would tip over a book, releasing a volleyball that would roll down a tilted shelf, hitting a long 2x4 that acted as a lever, tipping right to left and pulling a string attached to a small picture frame that would fall to the floor, releasing a hammer that would fall onto the alarm button of a clock radio, triggering the playing of WWAI at top volume. I could have added a couple of extra steps for fun, Brock said, but it's better to keep it simple. I had to hand it to him. We tested the alarm and it worked great. We tried it out twice, in fact. Once when we tripped it on purpose to test the setup, and once when I went outside to drop off a load of garbage and forgot to step over the fishing line. Brock was getting pretty good at resetting the alarm's moving parts. For a couple of days, we heard nothing. Brock and I threw ourselves into work and kind of forgot that the alarm was even there. Then, one night, after a particularly exhausting day of carrying broken furniture out to our dump pile, the sounds of voices and footsteps, people shuffling around on the first floor, woke me from a deep sleep. It was after 1 a.m., according to the clock by my bed. I could hear Brock's voice. Then a female. It's Wisteria, I thought. He must have caught her in the act. I threw on the same rumpled, dirty clothes that I had worn that day and headed downstairs to see what was happening. They were in the annex, seated around the workbench that we had been using as a dining room table. Wisteria was wearing a burgundy velvet cloak with gold trim and a hood. "Well, look who's awake," she said. I grimaced and waved. "I told you," Brock called to me. "I knew it was her." She looked a bit sheepish. "I don't normally get caught," she said. "I try not to return to the same place more than once, but in this case, it was too tempting." "Plus, we still have to go research that house," Brock said, "so you'd have to reveal yourself sooner or later." I dragged one of our mismatched chairs up to the table. "Nice cape," I said. "Thanks." She either didn't detect the sarcasm in my voice, or she was ignoring it. Wisteria was just telling me that she does this kind of thing a lot. "You do what? Do this for, like, people you know? Or..." My anxiety was getting in the way again. "Like, random people?" Wisteria held up a hand. "Okay, before I answer any questions, I have to swear you to secrecy about all this." "How come?" asked Brock. "Because," she said, "I'm not doing this to get credit." "Why not?" "People would think I'm weird," she said, "and everybody already thinks I'm strange enough." "So why are you doing it then?" She sighed. "Well, it started out as an idea from my therapist. I do talk therapy every couple of weeks as part of my treatment for bipolar. When I got into a deep funk one time, he thought it might be a way to pull me out." "And it worked?" She nodded. "Yeah, then I found out that I really enjoyed it, and I kept on doing it." "What do you, what exactly are you, what are you doing?" "Secret kindnesses. I find people who could use some help, and I help them." "Gifts?" asked Brock. "Sometimes. Or I send somebody a card if they need some cheering up. Or I put change into the vending machine so the next person to come along gets a free drink. Fill out comment cards with positive compliments. Go to the rest home and hang out with the old people for a while." "How do you find people to help?" Brock asked. "Everybody could use a little help, in one way or another. The hard part is figuring out what they need and thinking up a creative way to make it happen. You guys were easy. You said you were cleaning out the house of a dead hoarder." How did you know where we live, where we were at?" "Well, I've just gotten extra good at doing research. The internet is one way. The library is another way." Spooky wandered in and rubbed against Wisteria's leg. She held out her hand for the cat to sniff. I looked through back issues of the Broadacre Reporter for mentions of hoarding. In your case, it wasn't too strenuous. There aren't a lot of exciting events in this county, so when a Mrs. Veronica Glazer is crushed to death beneath a fallen stack of televisions, it was easily the top headline of the day about a year ago. Spooky jumped into Wisteria's lap and cuddled into her velvety cloak. "Traitor," I said. She smiled at the cat. "If I'd known about this little cutie, I would have brought some treats for him." "Is that for us?" Brock asked. He was looking at a wicker basket on the floor by her feet. "Well, it was," she said, "but I'm not sure you get it now, since you caught me before I had a chance to leave it." "Come on," Brock said. She lifted the basket to the table and pulled out a bottle of wine, a corkscrew, and 2 long-stemmed glasses. "Okay, it's a little housewarming gift." I was wary. "You're not legal, not to buy alcohol." "How?" "My father has an extensive wine collection. Supposedly, he has very good taste. I wouldn't know. I haven't a clue about that sort of thing. I do know that he'd never notice a missing bottle, though." "Will you drink with us?" Brock asked. Wisteria nodded. "Just 1 glass, though. I still have to bike home tonight." Brock popped the cork and poured. He and I shared a glass. Wisteria got her own. "So, who is your dad, then?" he asked. "Robert Hackett. He's a real estate developer. He developed North Broadacre." "Now I get it." "Yes," said Wisteria, "people know me, and that's why you must never tell anyone my secret. If people found out, they would be like, 'Oh, Isn't that nice? The eccentric little rich girl is showering the peasants with her gifts. When really, I'm in the game for my own selfish reasons. And it works? Brock asked. It helps you feel better? She took a swig. Sure, mostly. That and the mood-stabilizing drugs. Lithium, Depakote. Well, we're definitely putting your gifts to good use. She nodded graciously. Glad to hear it. She pulled her cigarettes and lighter from a pocket inside the cloak. Do you mind? Yes, I said. No, said Brock. She lit a cigarette over my objection and continued. You guys should come with me tomorrow. I have a special delivery to make. Then we can go research that house. Yeah, let's do that, said Brock. I was getting a little irritated by Brock, making plans with this girl and not consulting me, but I didn't say anything. She blew out a cloud of smoke. Seen any ghosts in here yet? Heard any voices? A candle. Just a candle went out. It was weird, like coincidentally. Just when we were talking about Mrs. Glazer. Zane here has changed his mind about ghosts in the afterlife, Brock said, after we heard that voice in the house. I was about to protest, but then Wisteria spoke. Nothing wrong with that. I'm a bit of a believer myself. I find belief in an afterlife much preferable to belief in nothingness. She downed the rest of her glass of wine. Not to be outdone, Brock finished off our glass and poured us another. Mind you, Wisteria continued, I'm not a big fan of the Judeo-Christian version of the afterlife. Don't tell my dad, though. The wine was sloshing, warm in my belly. My face felt flushed. Brock was the better drinker between the two of us, and a cup of soup was all I'd had for dinner that evening, so the alcohol was getting to me. I looked her straight in the eye. Streets of Gold not doing it for you? A mansion for everyone? No pain or suffering? Yeah, I went to Sunday school when I was a kid. Wisteria became serious. Gold is only valuable because it's rare. If it's common enough to make streets from, then who cares? If you saw it everywhere, all the time, wouldn't it be just as boring as streets of asphalt? I think that's just a metaphor, though, Brock said. She shrugged. Maybe so. Still, it illustrates the larger point. It would be boring. If you had everything you ever wanted, if you never had any pain or suffering, you'd get tired of existence after a while. Forever is a long-ass time. I nodded. I was getting into this. It reminded me of those late-night dorm conversations from my college days, the ones where no idea was too crazy, where the topics were meaningless, metaphysical silliness, but took on immense philosophical importance after a few drinks. Skull-crushing boredom with no release sounds like hell to me. I'd rather be gone than have to deal with that after a couple thousand years. Wisteria turned her chair to face me. Ah, but you don't want nothingness either, she said. So what could keep you entertained, or keep your mind occupied for an infinite length of time? I held up an index finger. Here's what I'd want. It sounds kind of hippie-ish, I think, but I'd want it to be more like becoming one with the universe, you know? You're not tied to a physical body. You could shift your viewpoint, see things from any perspective. Experience other people's lives, said Wisteria. You could watch things at the microscopic level, zoom in as far as you want, or zoom out to the very limits of the universe. Zip back and forth in time. Learn the answers to all the questions you ever had. And if the universe is infinite, you'd never run out of things to see, I said. Well, look at this, said Brock. You get a little alcohol into Zane and he loosens right up. I laughed, a little too hard. It startled the cat and he dashed out of the room. That is a conception of heaven that I could get on board with, said Wisteria. She stubbed out her cigarette on the table. Wish there was a way to know if it's right. I don't like the uncertainty. Why don't you ask Mrs. Glazer the next time you see her? Brock was smirking. Maybe I will, I said. I tell you what, said Wisteria. When I die, I'll make sure to find a way to communicate from the other side and let you know. Sounds like a plan, I said. But for now, I need to get myself back home. Wisteria stood and gathered her things. Tomorrow? For the library? We nodded sleepily and she headed out. I'm not sure if it was just the alcohol or the lateness of the hour, but I changed my mind about Wisteria. She wasn't so bad. The days were getting noticeably longer. The corn was nearly 6 inches tall then. The next afternoon, Wisteria returned, and we took a trip into Broadacre to visit the library. There are actually two, a modern institutional-type library that was built in the early 90s, and the original, one of those classical Greek-style monuments to learning. Wisteria assured us that the older library, constructed in the late 1800s, was much better. We headed to the center of old downtown, that part of Broadacre where the powers of redevelopment had never cast a glance. It may have been dirty and broke down, but it was also authentic. There were no chain restaurants here. Where businesses existed, they were family concerns, mom-and-pop eateries, and independent specialty stores. Call me a hipster, but I kind of liked it. Owners often lived above their shops in the 2- and 3-story commercial buildings that were crowded together without regard for style or era. 1888, 1908, 1924. Most buildings noted dates of construction upon their stones, chiseled along with the names that often didn't match the building's current use. Broadacre Savings and Loan was the name of one building that currently housed a hardware store. Ellison Hotel was inscribed upon another that was actually some sort of consignment shop. Sidewalks were shattered and broken. Weeds poked up through places where the once covered dirt was now exposed. As we passed a construction area demarcated by long sheets of particle board, I read a slogan, neatly spray-painted orange onto the temporary wall. What will you be remembered for? I really don't know, Mr. Anonymous Graffiti Artist, I thought glumly. I guess I should figure that out someday. These buildings memorialized the hopes and strivings of their constructors, the values and dreams of those long-deceased members of the community. Real people who once lived and walked right here. Here on this very street, separated from me only by time. It was like a secret language, of courage, of fear, of reverence, that I had no hope of understanding. Those who spoke it were too far removed. I inherited this city, I thought. These people had their chance. Now it's my turn. I wondered what I could do. Anything impressive and long-lasting seemed too big, too impossible. But I thought the hoarder house was impossible at first, and now I could see progress. We might even finish someday if we kept at it. Maybe I could do something. At least I'm not too old yet, I thought. I still have time to figure things out. We stopped at Tiny Wilson's Flowers, where Wisteria purchased a bouquet of long, purple blossoms that I didn't recognize. They turned out to be her namesake, Wisteria frutescens, the flower of a woody ornamental climbing vine. She made us watch from the store window as she jogged across the street to a first-floor residence, laid her gift on the welcome mat, and jammed a card between the door and the frame. Then she rang the bell and dashed back to us, nearly getting run down by a car that honked at her obnoxiously. We waited, my breathing shallow. Presently, a frail, elderly woman opened the door and picked up the card and flowers, her face puzzled but smiling. I couldn't help but smile myself to wonder what she was thinking. She looked up and down the street, but, seeing no one, retreated back into the house. Mrs. Kathy Van Houten, Wisteria said. I saw her sitting at the little cafe inside Mitchell's a couple of days ago. She looked sad. I followed her around for a bit. Her kids are far away and only visit at Christmas time. She's having knee replacement surgery soon. Her husband died a couple of years ago, and she takes care of herself. I laughed in disbelief. How did you find out all that stuff? She smiled. Do you still doubt me? I shook my head. We continued down the street and up the steps into the Broadacre Municipal Library. It was just as I had imagined. A canyon-like central reading hall, open all the way up to a skylight in the roof, was surrounded by 3 stories of bookshelves. Marble busts of important authors stared silently, preserving the solemn atmosphere. A large oil painting of a Revolutionary War hero that I didn't recognize hung on the south wall. Lots of wood, lots of brass. It was a Thursday, so, aside from an elderly couple reading newspapers, we had the place to ourselves. They looked up at Wisteria in confusion when we sat down at a table. This day, she was wearing a military-style marching band uniform from the 1950s, complete with cape, skirt, and plumed hat. She got those kind of looks quite a bit. I was starting to get used to it. Wisteria showed Brock and I how to search the public records archive, while she went off and hunted for news stories with the